The night was dark. There was an ominous silence in the gorge. John ran between the rocks and felt danger behind him. The formidable demons of the Fortress of Darkness were very close. The guards received orders to kill the fugitive at any cost. For the first time in several decades, someone dared to leave the fortress. The daredevil had to be punished. The main character realized that he would not be able to escape the chase and decided to take the fight. The killers surrounded their victim from all sides, hoping for an easy victory. There were a lot of thugs. The elder of the Heavenly Alliance of Demons and Murderers knew who he was sending his faithful servants against. Swords and axes flashed from everywhere. John fought with all his might, realizing that his long-awaited freedom was at stake. The demons did not know where the fugitive got his enormous energy. He seemed to hover over their heads, killing one after another. The main character realized that he could not cope with hundreds of militants with the help of a sword. He needed to hit everyone at once. This could only be done by a technique that took him several months to study. It was a beam of continuous fire. The fighter watched from a bird's eye view as his enemies fell dead, defeated by magical power. Most of the attackers were neutralized. The killed demons were replaced by new forces. The fugitive gathered all his energy. His sword flew like a bird, hitting the enemy. The forces were again unequal. The next 100 guards were very close. They could only be stopped by a wall of fiery light, which the main character took advantage of. The victory came at a difficult price. John was seriously wounded and quickly tried to leave the battlefield, realizing that this was a temporary respite. Each step was becoming more and more difficult. The main character was exhausted, but he had to move on. There was little left to a secret place where one could hide and recuperate. A small hut with supplies of food and water had been prepared a long time ago and was waiting for its owner. No one knew about this corner. A shadow flashed over the fugitive's head. Again, there was a battle ahead. This time, there was only one enemy. But John immediately realized that this was a strong opponent. Probably he was from the highest echelon of security. The guess was correct. In front of the main character stood a fighter with a level of protection from magic. Gathering the remaining internal energy, the fugitive struck first. The demon did not have time to put a block and was struck on the spot, but a new movement was felt behind him. Demon Queen Gloria watched the battle from the side. The beauty was sweet and radiated streams of energy, but John knew that behind the angelic face was hiding the most insidious and evil witch. The main character prepared his sword. He knew that he should not relax. Gloria did not hide her intentions. She promised her longtime acquaintance help in exchange for teaching the magical technique to the fighters of the Karo monks. The teaching combined several techniques, including magic and power techniques, which had no equal yet. John managed to master several basic techniques. The lady promised to hide the fugitive and heal his wounds. The demon queen knew that none of the freedom lovers could realize their dream, since a deadly worm was implanted into the body of everyone who became a military weapon of the Alliance's Fortress of Darkness, destroying everyone who expressed thoughts about escaping or wanted to carry it out. John tried to buy time. He understood that a fight was inevitable. The fugitive did not reveal the secret that the parasite inside him had long been destroyed. The witch tried to seduce her rival, but the main character had long known all her tricks. The fight was fierce. The energies of light and darkness came together. Lack of strength after unequal battles and injuries did not give a chance for success. The fighter held out until the last. He was the best killer of the fortress, which is why numerous demon troops were sent after him. But death was stronger. The hands of the monster queen flashed with incredible speed, and injured instantly, another shadow flashed nearby. The last thing the main character saw was the elder's sword, cutting off his limbs. John was left without legs and arms. The fugitive's thoughts were about an unfulfilled dream. He just wanted to live in an ordinary village, admire flowers and enjoy sunsets. His silent request to start this life anew flew out of his body along with his soul. Finally, the witch cut off the head of the rebellious fighter. There was silence. Only the singing of birds disturbed the peace. A young man lay on a bed with his eyes closed in a small, cozy house in a small village and hardly breathed. Events, battles, someone's faces flashed in my head. 2 young fighters sat near a mountain of corpses and talked. One dreamed of green grass and wildflowers, freedom without murder and violence. The second guy asked to take him with him to an unknown country. Suddenly, the first young man fell dead, blood pouring from his mouth. A friend, and this was young John, tried to save his partner. But the guard commander appeared and warned that the death worm kills everyone who utters the word freedom. The unconscious young man screamed in horror and came to his senses. Looking around, the main character saw a small room with bright windows, not understanding where he was. A girl entered the house with a tray in her hands. The young man grabbed a thin object and put it to the throat of the frightened maid, trying to find out who sent her and for what purpose. The reflection in the mirror showed a young, thin guy with a frightened look and decrepit skin on his body. John could not believe his eyes. Two men entered the house. It was clear from their clothes that one of them was a doctor. He began to examine the main character and left infusions for complete recovery, which had to be taken daily. The older man was in charge and carefully watched the guy. On the same day, the healer reported to his master, the fourth heir to the throne Rei and the ruler's disciple, about the condition of the young man, who, as it turned out, was third in status, saying that he had completely lost his strength after a 3-month coma. The herbs left behind were supposed to kill the weakened body. At the same time, the chief guard of the state, Jackson, spoke to Supreme Overlord Sullivan about the condition of the third heir to the throne, noting the presence of weak muscles and memory lapses. A conversation between two unfamiliar men in the courtyard of a neighboring house did not help the main character clarify the situation. John used his old method of covert monitoring and watched people passing by, listening to their conversations. The main character realized that reincarnation had occurred. He was given a second life in a new body in an unknown place. Everything had to be sorted out. The first priority was to fix his thin, saggy body, and John began recovery sessions. The magic of replenishing energy more than once helped the old fighter after grueling battles. Healers visited the young master almost every day, marveling at his quick recovery. There was a lively conversation going on in one of the houses. The fourth gentleman did not understand why his opponent, who suddenly emerged from a coma, was gaining strength despite taking decoctions of special herbs. John trained daily. Muscle elasticity and reflexes gradually returned. The classes were not in vain. The young man felt in fighting shape again. One morning, a young man heard indignant speeches outside the door, and a stranger entered the house. The little maid was holding her cheek. There were tears on her face. A girl named Stephanie, in the presence of her guards, who prevented John from escaping, demanded that the agreement be signed. The young master promised to listen to the beauty and asked to leave for a while, citing a change of clothes, while at the same time trying to find out from young Emily who his guest was. Upon returning, the main character listened to the claims of Ray's younger sister. The contract stated that the girl was engaged in the care and treatment of the third gentleman and demanded a large sum of money for this. John agreed to sign the document under certain conditions. The main character told Stephanie that he must report the situation to the master and called the guard. The frightened girl had no choice but to destroy the agreement with her own hands. She understood that the ruler would not approve of her secret actions and would punish the entire family. Jackson reported to his master about the third's request to visit the master. The examination was completed. The doctor noted the young man's complete recovery. John was getting comfortable in his new body, but he could not understand why his second life again brought him together with demons, whose supreme ruler was the mysterious Sullivan. One fine day, permission to receive was received, and John set off. The meeting was scheduled at the Temple of Justice, located on the edge of the highest cliff. It seemed as if endless steps led straight into the sky. The shadows of guards flashed from all sides. Finally, the ascent was completed. The chief guard and his attendant remained waiting outside. The massive door with the symbols of power swung open and John stepped inside. The main character was greeted by a flowering meadow. The sun was shining brightly. Roe deer and hares were running in the distance. This was a picture from his old dream. The path led straight to a lonely small temple. The demon lord was already waiting for the guest. John noted that his legs seemed to carry him forward on their own. Jackson stood at the entrance in thought. Only 2 people entered this door. One stayed there forever. The young man was the third visitor. No one knew what fate awaited him. The main character respectfully greeted his master. Sullivan was much taller than everyone else and looked tired. The men drank tea and started talking. The Supreme Commander inquired about the reason for the meeting. Under the menacing gaze, the young man was confused and could not utter a word. Many thoughts flashed through the main character's head, and he asked for permission to go out into nature, at least temporarily. The demon lord promised to inform about his decision later. The first guard standing at the gloomy door of the Temple of Justice was surprised to see the third gentleman coming out. The ruler was in thought. Something alarmed him about the young man. He had changed a lot after a long coma. The only witness to thoughts out loud was a poisonous snake sitting in a cage, who was captured because of its resemblance to a dragon. The young man's request was granted. He was sent to the bamboo forest. It was just a shock, not at all like nature and freedom. As a guard and servant, John was assigned the chief servant of the detachment of judges, Bob. who was repeatedly in this dangerous place on missions. For 2 days, the young man sat among the continuous thickets of thick bamboo. The sunlight practically did not penetrate through the huge trees. Realizing that only he himself could get out of the forest, the main character began to train his ability to restore strength. The sessions were successful. Darkened hair indicated that the energy level had been returned to its original level, which was before the coma. It was necessary to continue the classes. After a few days, John could already sense the enemy at a distance, see and hear at the level of the most sensitive animals. The young man sent his bodyguard to the library. He ordered textbooks with magical techniques and spells to be brought to him. Bob was surprised. The third gentleman should have known them since childhood. The guard came to the main guard for help. The guy's request intrigued both. Jackson allowed us to take books with the simplest teachings. Bob received the treasured key and went to the knowledge repository. The main character was horrified by the number of volumes and began to study, sending his bodyguard to get protective equipment, since there were no weapons in the house. In the evening, having decided to take a break from textbooks, John went out to the yard and heard strange, loud sounds. A huge chicken with 3 heads, 6 legs and wings of 2 meters each was flying towards him. Since there was nothing at hand, the young man had to fight off with bamboo stakes from the fence. It was very difficult to break through the feather shield. The monster did not give up. Hearing the sounds of a struggle and the smell of blood, the guard returning from a mission rushed to help. The third gentleman dealt with the huge bird on his own. He demanded an explanation from Bob. The bodyguard was in the bamboo forest several times. Not everyone sent to this house survived, and the fence, built in 3 rows as protection, did not save him from attacks by terrible monsters in animal form. There were several valuable plants in the forest, from which medicines and decoctions were made for all diseases and to restore the body. So once a year a detachment came here to collect the potion. John took up his books with renewed vigor. He wanted to defeat the monsters and get out of the forest prison. It was impossible to study all the magic, so the main character decided to combine both teachings, including all the previous accumulated experience in combat techniques. The energy flared up with powerful force. The experiment was a success. In the morning, the main character went into the forest to test new abilities. The monsters were not long in coming. A pack of shaggy werewolves attacked the stranger. The young man managed to defeat the demons. It was time to return to the house. The chief guard was aware of every step of the third master and constantly reported on his life in exile to his master. John did not have time to get to a safe place. A large, scary beast with fangs and horns appeared ahead. Bob ran to help his owner but did not have time. The collision was strong. The main character flew away and hit the ground. His right arm was broken. The beast, a mixture between a horse and a tiger, advanced on the young man, who had lost the ability to fight back with a sword. The bodyguard distracted the monster with a loud scream and started running away from the house. The monster chased Bob. The distance between them was closing. The experienced guard calculated correctly, and the animal ended up in a camouflaged pit with sharp bamboo stakes. The man ran towards the master until the next demon appeared. Several days passed. The hand healed almost immediately. The power of the secret forest was amazing. The body was restored and strengthened on its own. During his next trip to the forest, John killed the beast. There should have been enough meat for many days. Classes on working with internal energy continued regularly. Both young men noticed that their muscles had increased several times. John explained to his partner that within 2 months, they had to find the heart of the forest and get out of the thickets so that they would not be torn to pieces. In the very center, there was supposed to be bamboo growing, which had special power. It had to be peeled and juiced to get the next level of energy. During forays into the forest, the young man collected rare herbs to prepare a potion. Bob said that only here you can find a plant that relaxes the body after a tense battle and blocks part of the brain. John realized that the decoction that the doctor prescribed for him was not supposed to restore his condition, but to kill him, therefore. They wanted to get rid of him. While the main character was fighting in the bamboo forest, the fourth gentleman questioned his servant and came up with new plots against his main competitor. The plan was ready. The support of influential people was needed. The day of the final exit into the forest came. Bob tried to dissuade the gentleman, but there was no time to hesitate. The bodyguard volunteered to accompany John, who allowed them to go together only to the border of the dangerous center. It was necessary to move around the grove quickly and unnoticed. The partners reached a strange cemetery of animal monsters. The smell was terrible. Suddenly, a breeze appeared and the protagonist ordered the bodyguard to stay. The flow of magical wind intensified, and it became more and more difficult to walk. John could barely stand but tried to move forward. To turn off the influence of magic and apply additional powers, a pre-prepared potion came in handy. The main character drank a miraculous decoction. The gusts of wind disappeared, and the young man moved on, moving in the form of a silent phantom. This skill was useful to him from his past life. Stumbling over a stone, the unfortunate phantom fell to the ground. John did not expect this. He knelt and looked around. The main character's attention was attracted by a small animal curled up in a ball and snoring peacefully. The desire to pet the fox was great, but the young man decided to do it on the way back. The treasured magic bamboo was nearby. The energy of the trees charged everything around. Seeing a small sprout, John decided to use it as a source of power. The roots sat firmly in the ground and did not want to give in. Unfortunately, there was no magic elixir in the bamboo embryo. The power was only in adult plants. It was necessary to cut down the tree, but the sword only scratched the bark. I had to use the force of a cutting blow, after which the bamboo collapsed as if it had been cut. John looked at the thick trunk in confusion. An orange baby suddenly quietly appeared nearby. The main character remembered his guard's warning that in a dangerous forest, the smallest animal could turn out to be a terrible monster. But the little fox's eyes were so big and kind that his hand reached out to pet the fluffy little one. The animal grabbed John's fingers with sharp teeth. Bob approached and was surprised how the gentleman was able to cut down a thick tree. It was impossible to carry the huge trunk, so John decided to clean it on sight. Before the partners had time to drink the coveted juice, heartbreaking sounds were heard. Beast demons were advancing from all sides, their numbers increasing every minute. The main character picked up the red-haired baby from the ground and threw him to his bodyguard, ordering him to run into the house for protection. No one knew that the great demon lord could be keeping an eye on the third contender. Sullivan, being thousands of kilometers away from the bamboo thickets, knew every move of one of the heirs to the throne. The little fox's eyes watched John until he disappeared from sight. These were the eyes of a ruler assessing the actions of one of his future successors. Monsters attacked from all sides. Their number did not decrease. John was strong and merciless. The bamboo juice was already beginning to take effect. To win, the main character had to use all the magical teachings he had studied. Previous techniques also came in handy. The wall of fiery light saved its owner more than once. There was not a single living animal left around, and John went to look for the way to the protective house. He did not remember the road at all. For a moment there was suspicious silence, and the heightened sense of the protagonist suggested that there was danger behind him. The giant python with a split body attacked first, but the young man was ready to attack. The snake turned out to be faster and wrapped its powerful long body around the protagonist's arms, like a rope. The steel sword melted in its mouth like plasticine. John saw before his eyes a poisonous tooth and a long tongue, which a second later were replaced by the tip of a blade. The faithful bodyguard could not wait for his partner, and without following the order, he went to look for him. His appearance turned out to be very timely. The monster was dead. Bob helped his new friend get up. He had to continue the battle. The demons in animal skin became active again and surrounded the fighters. The battle was unequal. The number of monsters did not decrease, and there was nowhere to wait for help. The wall of fiery light, which saved John in a previous life from the fortress guards, again helped destroy the approaching monsters. The main character's strength was running out. The bodyguard tried to support him. The young people had no opportunity to escape. The demons, ready to rush and tear the warriors to pieces, suddenly froze. The little fox stood in front of his saviors and seemed to hypnotize the enemies. A flash of lightning illuminated the heart of the terrible bamboo forest. John woke up with something wet on his face and saw a red-haired baby licking his cheek. An unharmed bodyguard lying on the grass nearby. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. All the predators had disappeared. The big eyes of the animal looked devotedly at the main character. The capital of ancient Balaban was preparing for the annual holiday and welcoming guests from all over the empire and neighboring countries. The main temple of the great demon lord was visited by family members and the organizers of the event. Final preparations were being made. Sullivan listened to reports and gave instructions. Jackson was the master's main assistant. He prepared a plan and waited for further instructions. The first master and heir to the throne was away. The ruler greeted the second and praised him for his success in mastering magical teachings. Greg thanked the teacher and promised to continue the lessons. Ray was next. Standing with all the family members present, he was instructed to master the theory of magic. Fifth, Kate also received praise from her lord for her success in combat skills, despite the fact that she was a girl. Little Roxy was sixth, and she suffered greatly for her poor health and lack of interest in training. The girl was scared and promised to improve. John appeared at the gate and quickly walked to the center of the hall, greeting his master. Sullivan did not see the main character for several months and noted how he matured and glowed with powerful energy. The young man received special praise. The ruler appreciated the strong spirit and fighting skills in everyone. The head of the family invited the third candidate to follow him, dismissing the others to prepare for the celebration. In the central square, Jackson met the Master of Education. Patricia was in charge of finances in the empire and was puzzled by the holiday expenses. Those close to him discussed the appearance of a third student who looked great, although recently, according to rumors, he was in a long coma. Gossip irritated Ray. He was preparing the next plan to destroy his opponent. Sullivan and John went down to the lake. In the gazebo on the water, no one could interfere with their privacy. The great demon lord expressed admiration for the new level that the young man had reached in the bamboo forest. The main character was surprised how the master was able to find out about his skill. As a reward, John received a decanter with the divine elixir of heavenly powers, which was considered a drink of the highest, and permission to return home. Tired travelers set off on their way back. Seeing the gift, Bob was delighted. He had only heard about its existence and had never tried it. The main character approached his home after 9 months of absence and realized that he missed him. A little fox met the owner on the threshold. John entered the courtyard with the animal in his arms. Approaching closer to the door, the young man felt a black force that smelled like his competitor and became wary. The faithful servant met her master with tears of joy and ran to prepare dinner and water for washing. For the first time in many months, the main character could relax. John lay there and remembered the look with which Ray saw him off when he saw him in the main temple. It was a flash of hatred and rage. It was already night. There was silence in the house. There was no need to wait for the monsters to attack, and you could rest peacefully. The fourth gentleman also did not sleep, discussing the news with his faithful servant. The doctor was surprised why his master called the killers away from the yard, because everything was ready for the assassination attempt. Ray could not explain the reason. When he saw John during the day, he realized that he had changed a lot and decided postpone the murder. Bob, who came to dinner, could not believe that so much delicious food belonged to them. There were also enough drinks, and the company sat down at the table. Emily was ordered to sit at the table and eat with everyone. The partners started talking. John was interested in the supreme structure of the empire and the opportunity to meet influential people. In a past life, he was a loner, and now he wanted support behind him. The faithful bodyguard noted only 2 persons of the state who had access to all connections. These were the general of strategy, whom it was unrealistic to see. He was always busy, and the master of education. Ray also remembered Patricia, who also wanted to get help from a representative of higher power. The servant was supposed to invite a noble lady to dinner. It was early morning. Emily was surprised that her master was already on his feet and actively training. She noted how mature he had become. Bob brought a sword to his friend as a gift to replace the one damaged by a terrible snake. The weapon was made of excellent steel and looked impressive. The master accepted Ray's invitation. She was interested in what the young master would offer her. She warned that, given her status, she maintained neutrality and did not participate in the showdown between the master's students. But the fourth knew the guest's weak side. Patricia was surprised by the master's knowledge of her personal affairs and was forced to agree. The young man asked for help in daily transmission of information from the third student's maid about all his words and plans. But the conclusion of the agreement was prevented by an unexpected stranger. John, with a little fox on his shoulder and a jug of wine, easily passed through the guards and greeted those present. The main character offered help to the head of education. He realized that the noble lady had a sick loved one, and she really needed the rare item that the fourth applicant promised her for his treatment. But the healing properties of the potion were greatly exaggerated. John invited the master to his house to continue dinner. Ray was indignant and cursed his enemy. Patricia and the main character left the restaurant. The young man refused any payment and wrote down plans for decoctions and physical exercises, with the help of which he recovered from a long coma caused by a complete loss of energy. Now he knew who sent him to this state. The owner warned Emily that he would be delayed. Hearing a knock on the gate, the maid happily ran to open the doors. On the threshold stood Ray's doctor, who took advantage of the master's absence. The attackers decided to independently organize the receipt of information. Since the master refused to fulfill the fourth's request for surveillance, the servant grabbed the girl and took her to the barn. He showed the child a beetle that eats the body from the inside if the antidote is not taken in time, and the person dies in terrible agony. The villain forcibly put the insect into Emily's mouth and ordered her to report to her owner daily. promising to give her medicine in return. Several weeks passed, and Patricia visited John. She was pleased with the results. The rehabilitation course began successfully. The socialite offered help to the savior. The main character knew about the decency and intelligence of the Master of Education. She kept notes on all financial issues of the empire, as well as the relationships between representatives of various services and departments. The grateful lady handed over her manuscripts to friends. The young man sat down to study the volumes and was very surprised. There was a lot of previously unknown information. Having learned that there is a special detachment of fighters that does not obey anyone, and having told the maid that he will be absent for several days, the main character went to the meeting. The guard warned his chief that a third gentleman had arrived, and not finding his friend, he went alone to the camp of the lawless men. The Boar murder gang was not part of any clan, and acted only on the instructions of its commander, the strong and fearless Kate, who lost her left eye in one of the battles. She had no equal even among men. One evening the fighters went into a tavern to celebrate another victory. An unknown young man was sitting at the table in the hall. The main character, and it was he, proposed negotiations to the commander, citing available information, and accused Kate of conspiring with the fourth gentleman, for which a large bribe was received. John offered to surrender to justice, but the girl denied everything. The militants were seated at nearby tables. The commander was tired of the intrusive gentleman, and she decided to end the conflict by force. The energy of a powerful blow surrounded her body with a wall. The main character did not expect the attack and flew off to the wall. The boss was supported by the entire squad. They were confident of her quick victory. Standing up, John did not take long to respond and responded with a lightning beam. Kate was carried away several meters. The walls of the tavern were collapsing. Tables and chairs were flying around. The fight continued. The commander almost killed a fox cub that suddenly appeared on the battle line, completely angering the young man. Bob heard the sounds of a struggle and hurried to help his partner. The head of the guards, who had seen a lot, knew about the invincibility of the boar and his boss. But the picture that met his eyes shocked him. John stood there unharmed. The battle of magic and energy flows continued. The main character repeatedly offered to give up, but the girl did not lose hope of victory. The advantage was on the master's side. The squad leader used her main weapon of magic, the blue wave, but the enemy held out. John realized that the desperate girl would fight to the end and became angry. It was necessary to end the fight. The main character decided to increase the power. The flight of the dragon finally defeated Kate. The team of thugs looked at their commander with sympathy. The wounded girl lay on the stones and realized that her death was very close. I remembered my distant childhood, when a girl was sent to a detachment to learn martial arts in order to protect herself. The child grew up. Kate had already learned a lot. She lived one day at a time, realizing that she could be killed the same way she killed the others. Strength and courage helped the brave and courageous girl defeat the squad leader and take his place. Since then, she has steadfastly defended her subordinates. Deciding that she was not yet ready to die, the militant boss grabbed her favorite weapon. A charged sword always helped her out in difficult times. Streams of energy rushed like a whirlwind towards the calmly standing John. The hand of the steel wall stopped the barrage. The exhausted leader of the killers could barely stand on her feet. The main character received only minor burns on his hands. The girl admitted defeat, but tried to remain proud and independent. John tried to finish off his enemy, but her gaze was irresistible. Defeated, Kate still tried to defend herself and defend her squad. The young man realized that he could not kill. His hands dropped by themselves. The third gentleman gave money to the owner of the tavern to restore the destroyed premises. John ordered not to take this amount from the poor merchant and went home. The commander and his squad remained near the broken walls. The trio, including the animal and Bob, were in a hurry for a late dinner. The girl looked after her winner. For the first time, she met a warrior with such inner strength and honesty. It was late at night, but candles were burning in Ray's house. The fourth gentleman already knew about the meeting of his enemy with the squad leader. The young man recalled a deal for which he gave Kate a significant amount of money and which no one could know about. Ray guessed that Patricia could be John's only source of information. The incense sticks relaxed the villain's body and thoughts, and another plan of revenge matured in his head. The fourth student was strong in poisons, so he decided to paralyze the enemy with poison vapors, the death from which would be long and painful. That is why the health of the baby of the sixth generation of heirs was fading. The child was under constant influence of toxic substances that came from the sticks. The deadly weapon was ready. It was necessary to arrange and set fire to the incense around the bed of the sleeping enemy. Poor Emily was ordered to carry out her plan on pain of death. The girl recalled the gentleman's kindness and warm attitude towards her. The owner and the maid tried to come up with a nickname for their pet. but nothing came to mind other than golden, considering the orange color of the animal. Bob burst into his partner's house unexpectedly, saying that Kate had surrendered to justice and confessed to the attempt on the third gentleman. The young men hurried to the dungeon together. The leader of the thug squad sat in a cell, chained to the stone walls with shackles and handcuffs. John tried to question the proud girl, but she was silent. Taking advantage of his position, the ruler's third disciple ordered the attendant to release the commander, as he denied her attack on him. When leaving, the main character invited Kate to come visit him. At home, the partners discussed the motives for the girl's action. John explained to his friend that this was the only way to divert suspicion from the entire squad and not suspect her joining the camp of Ray's enemies. If Boar's boss had admitted receiving a bribe from the fourth master, the entire gang of militants would have been detained. The head of the judge's guard was surprised at the sanity and prudence of his friend. He was very different from the man Bob knew before the coma. Now the gentleman was wiser, as if he had lived 100 years. A bang at the door interrupted the conversation. Kate stopped by to thank John with some delicious food she had prepared herself. The commander spoke about Ray's secret knowledge and advised him to be careful, not trusting anyone. The fourth student asked the servant how things were going with the magic wands. News from Emily did not come for 2 days. The doctor realized that the girl did not go against her owner and launched a secret beetle in her body to be destroyed. The conversation of like-minded people in the main character's house lasted for a long time. Bob still did not believe the girl and stood behind the gentleman ready to defend him. Evening came. It was time for evening training. John invited his friends to stay the night. Kate looked at the unknown technique. She did not understand why the main character was revealing his secrets. Bob spent more than 1 month with the master and knew his reasoning. He explained to the girl that according to the third disciple of the ruler, people should trust and help each other. The head of the gang had never heard such a theory. She did not know what good was. Tired and hungry friends went to look for the maid, whom they had not seen all day. Emily lay on the floor in her room and moaned in pain. John examined the poor thing. She could hardly tell him about the order of the fourth master. The main character identified the girl's internal enemy, which, like a death worm, kills organs. There was an urgent need to save the maid, and John brought her to his place. The Supreme Overlord called the chief guard. He was interested in the third student, but Jackson did not tell anything new. Sullivan was the only one who knew the secret of the bamboo forest and could not understand what happened there and how the young man survived. The main thing in the grove was a merciless and cruel jackal who was supposed to capture the soul of the third contender. The animal had a constant cycle of life and death cycles. When the adult died, a small cub appeared, and so on endlessly. It was this animal that was the most formidable owner of the forest, which took moisture and energy from all living things, including plants and monsters. The appearance of a baby meant the beginning of new wars and conflicts. This little fluffy fox with huge ears and naive eyes was the most terrible demon of all worlds. John remembered all the healing methods of his past life, which helped him repeatedly heal wounds and get rid of the internal parasite in due time. The little maid's condition was grave. The main character continued the healing rituals of magic. Finally, Emily coughed and spat out the deadly insect along with her blood. It was a corrosion beetle that gnawed out the insides, and the person died in agony and pain. John knew who once again tried to kill him and the poor maid, who did not carry out the deadly order, sacrificing her life. At this time, Kate found incense sticks in Emily's room. The girl knew what could happen with their use. Ray repeatedly talked about his experiments. The whole box was supposed to incapacitate and kill the third gentleman completely. The commander began to think more and more often that she liked John and was worried about him. Ray realized that the poisoning option did not work again and was preparing the next one. The doctor suggested changing tactics, worried that his master would not have enough skills to defeat the stronger enemy. A noise outside the door made both villains turn around. The gate was demolished by a powerful blast wave. The dust dissipated. The menacing third disciple stood, his eyes sparkling like lightning. John demanded an explanation for all the attempts. Ray denied his involvement in all the troubles of his competitor. In a rage, the protagonist punched his opponent in the face. The fourth decided that the time had come to finally deal with the hated enemy, calling on his main magical power of a giant poisonous snake. The battle between the two contenders for the throne of the Demon Lord has begun. Ray was fast, but he was losing strength, which John took advantage of. The magical energy sparkled. The battle was fierce. Everyone wanted revenge. The main character suddenly missed a blow with his hand and felt a sharp pain in his side. Ray used a cunning trick and released his claws with poison. The wound did not stop John. He was ready to take revenge for his coma, for the torment of little Emily. Ray saw his enemy transforming right before his eyes and was afraid. The formidable rock of a competitor, blazing with a thirst for murder, was approaching the fourth student. It is difficult to say how long the battle would last. Everyone was determined to win, but a menacing shout stopped both opponents. A dark cloud appeared in the sky. The black guards of the Palace of Justice flew to stop the bloodshed. The executors of the law had to take into custody both participants in the battle and escort them to the courtroom. John managed to reach the doctor and took out the deadly beetle. Ray realized that he was finally losing his faithful servant. The insect immediately entered the head through the ear canal. The death of the fourth master's treacherous assistant came instantly. The Palace of Justice that night resembled a battlefield. Interrogations of both opponents lasted several hours. Finally, the law enforcement officer invited John to the reconciliation room. The main character felt an outgoing wave of anger and saw the shadows of two people. The elderly stranger and Ray were already in the hall. The unknown person introduced himself as the head of the Palace of Justice. John asked the owner to take off the mask that representatives of this detachment usually wore. The request surprised Tad. No one had previously felt his double appearance or seen his second face. He was amazed by John's ability. The head of law and order ordered the warring parties to observe a truce. In the Empire, two departments were involved in monitoring order and judicial proceedings. Bob belonged to the first and was one of the heads of the judge's guards. Tad led the Black Guards of Justice, who always had to wear masks. Ray refused to listen to the demands since he considered himself to be of higher status and went home. The conversation of the others was short, but John managed to try the drink prepared by the owner of the palace himself. The taste was very pleasant. Tad shared the bottle with the guest. The men said goodbye, and the head of justice again felt something familiar in the departing third air. Evening fell on the town. The weather was wonderful. There was silence all around. Ray walked home and remembered the outrageous instructions of the owner of the law enforcement hall. The sound of a broken branch made the villain flinch in fear. His enemy sat on the root of a huge tree and smiled. John offers to drink a noble drink and just chat, something they haven't done since childhood. The opponents sat opposite each other. The main character was interested in Ray's future plans. The fourth gentleman wanted power and was ready to walk over corpses to it. He could not imagine life without a throne. The younger one promised that he would continue to fight with the third until complete victory. John suggested continuing the fight without witnesses. This was a good idea, and Ray decided to deal with his competitor without witnesses. The rivals were ready for battle again. For further safety, John needed to defeat and destroy Ray. The Black Guard reported to the owner that both gentlemen continued the skirmish without leaving the judge's garden. The magical transformation into a monster with snakeskin and long poisonous claws took place instantly. Ray prepared several insidious surprises for his enemy and anticipated victory. The opponents engaged in mortal combat. The wall of fiery light threw the snake back several meters. Ray fell but quickly returned to duty as the battle continued. John managed to maintain his advantage in the fight, but the fourth contender turned out to be a strong fighter. The rivals' blocks for power infuriated the villain. Ray swung his hand to hit the enemy, but John instantly moved to another place. The fourth had never seen such a skill in his opponent. The main character stood a few meters away and prepared to strike. In an instant, the young man was nearby. A powerful surge of internal energy struck Ray right in the vital center. A strong blow knocked the enemy to the ground. Fury overwhelmed the fourth student, and the snake finally burst out. Poisonous streams of lava flew in all directions. Ray was transformed, and with every second he turned more and more into a demon with a snake tongue. A thick fog began to descend from the sky, enveloping everything around. A gloomy, thick cloud was getting closer and closer to the main character. The fourth student warned John that the damage from the long claws received earlier, under the influence of the mist, would attract toxic substances to itself, killing everything inside the body. The main character felt that it was becoming more difficult to breathe. The wounds really began to bother him more. It was time to get out of the ambush. The fire ring technique helped the main character destroy the deadly cloud. Suddenly, John heard a familiar voice and looked around. A sobbing Emily crawled across the grass and begged for help. The main character rushed to his maid and tried to lift her. The girl's eyes sparkled with magical light. It was an optical illusion. Then the baby turned into a stream of light. The young man did not understand what was happening to him. The Queen of Demons walked towards John and threatened him with violence. The main character saw his bloody hands and stumps of legs lying nearby on the grass and heard the elder's voice. Ray watched with pleasure the hallucinations of his opponent and gathered strength for the next throw. Long, clawed fingers reached out of the fog. It seemed that they would soon plunge into the neck of the main character. Suddenly, the fog disappeared, and the protagonist's hand tightly squeezed the snake demon's throat. preventing him from breathing. Ray did not understand how his enemy was able to get out of the magical smoke ring so quickly. The competitors stood opposite each other and prepared for a new fight. John decided to finally defeat the fourth, calling on the energy of a merciless strike. The snake owner also tried to gather his power. Both opponents went on the attack. Flashes of light were visible several kilometers away. The main character used the magic of acceleration and triple strike, instantly moving close to the enemy. The goal was achieved. Ray was seriously wounded. John failed to deliver a fatal blow. An unexpected stream of light held the weapon. The main character could not move the sword. The head of the Palace of Justice arrived in time and prevented the murder. The main character easily dealt with the block and quickly headed towards the owner of the masked guards. Tad tensed and prepared to defend himself. John flew like an arrow at the defender of law and order. The magic shield worked instantly. The main character stopped only for a few seconds. The guardian of the law stood behind a solid energy wall and did not see the enemy. Having relaxed his defenses, Tad looked around. The third gentleman was not nearby. The head of justice realized that he had been deceived, and the attack was planned not on him, but on the fourth disciple of the ruler. Ray could not move. Blood flowed like a river from a large wound. The Chief Justice once again tried to stop John. The main character decided that killing his merciless enemy would be an easy punishment for him. A more abrupt punishment was needed. The third student blocked the energy of a competitor, after which the person lies in a coma, as Ray did to him at one time. Only a few can return from such a state. The fourth gentleman was no longer dangerous to the main character. Revenge was accomplished. Ray lay helplessly on the grass. The head of the courtroom called a detachment to escort the detained third gentleman. The Black Guards of Justice arrived immediately. The main character raised his hands, indicating that he would not resist, and surrendered. Tad visited the master's third disciple in the cell where he was chained. John easily tore the super titanium metal, showing the owner of the law enforcement hall that the handcuffs were a tribute and not an admission of guilt, which he did not feel, since he himself had been repeatedly subjected to attempts on his life and health by Ray. The main character considered his detention illegal, since there was no statement from the accused, and said goodbye to Ted. John hurried home. The head of the palace finally warned him that he would be under constant surveillance and control of law and order. Again, a distant, familiar smell enveloped the guard remaining in the dungeon. He could not remember where these sensations came from. Tad thought, but to no avail, something blocked his thoughts from the past. The friends met the main character, and everyone went together to celebrate the victory to visit Bob. John talked about his battle with Ray while devouring plate after plate of delicious home-cooked food. The main character thanked his like-minded people for their support and help. The third gentleman thanked his bodyguard and partner for the few months they spent together in the bamboo forest, which taught them both a lot. But Bob had responsibilities at work, so John reminded him that he needed to get back to work. Kate also received words of gratitude, but she also needed to return to the detachment, which had already waited for its commander. Friends sadly realized that John was right, but did not want to leave. The head of the guards felt empty, as if this was their last meeting. The main character said goodbye and hurried home. He really missed his little friends. Emily did not expect the gentleman to return quickly. She was informed that he was detained, and she was very upset. The girl threw herself at John's feet with joy. The little fox was spinning nearby, waving his fluffy tail. The Supreme Demon Lord walked through a flowering meadow and asked the chief guard about the duel of his students. He was surprised by the decision of the third to save the life of his competitor instead of killing him. Sullivan recalled little Ray, who was a very smart child, but did not like to study, so he mastered only one magical teaching without improving combat techniques. When the fourth student grew up, he did not continue to learn new knowledge, improving only the art of poisons. The Lord understood that in order to come out of a coma, special powers and techniques were needed, which the student, unlike John, did not possess, so his return to duty was almost impossible. One fine day, the main character was visited by a guest. Patricia came to talk about the successes of her ward and asked John to personally examine the girl and begin her full recovery. As a deal, the Master of Education promised to fulfill any request of the Master. The young man tried to refuse, but the lady was persistent. It was necessary to decide on the date of the trip. John did not know how to fulfill his only dream of freedom, and having heard that a convoy was expected to travel abroad for rare goods in the next month, he agreed to help. He already knew that Patricia was responsible for the formation of the detachment. Bob was engaged in self-improvement. After the last assignment from the authorities, he matured significantly and acquired new skills and knowledge. The head of the guards recalled the meeting with the gentleman and could not calm down. He became very attached to the young man and could not understand where the young man got so much wisdom and experience, noting to himself once again that before the coma he was a completely different person, greedy and not very kind. A colleague distracted the guard from his sad thoughts by informing him that the chief judicial guard was looking for him. The young man went to the commander. It was time to start a new task. The order surprised the experienced fighter. It was necessary to create additional protection for the convoy by the judge's guards, in addition to the usual security detachment that was on every trip. Patricia's house hospitably welcomed the main character. John and the hostess entered a bright, spacious room, in which a beauty was lying on the bed. It was Elizabeth, the master's ward. Despite her very young age, the girl was in the caste of enlightenment and led a large number of directions there. A sudden unknown blockage put her to bed for several months. No healers could cope with her condition. The recommendations given a few weeks ago by the young men were able to restore consciousness. The lady was able to get up and master some techniques. John carefully studied the inner energy of the young lady. The blood was mixed with poison. Patricia saw the streams of pure energy that emanated from her guest and believed in success. The third gentleman tried to remove harmful substances from the girl's body that had been in her for several months and were killing her vitality. Blood began to flow from the nose, which was a good sign. The poison was leaving the beauty's body. Several days of training gave positive results. The girl was conscious, she could speak, and active training quickly strengthened her muscles. Elizabeth was getting better every day. She had not lost her memory and previous skills and already wanted to begin her duties. John announced his price. He asked, secretly from everyone, to be included in the convoy traveling beyond the borders of the state. The Master of Education was angry. It was impossible to do this. The young man convinced her that everything was possible. The deal must take place, since he had completed his task of saving the girl under his charge. Patricia understood that it was almost impossible to place a person in a convoy without the knowledge of government officials and security. John insisted on his request. The master, after thinking, agreed and asked for time to prepare for the difficult task. Having said goodbye, John got ready to go home and prepare for a long trip. Before leaving, the main character went to see the girl. Elizabeth was surprised by the arrival of an unfamiliar young man. She looked great. The third gentleman introduced himself and said that the beauty owed her salvation to his efforts and knowledge. She thanked the young man. The energy that emanated from the master's ward was similar to that of the main character. He felt her power and knew what she needed. John sent the girl to training. She had to immediately recover after a long period of rest. Patricia was very worried whether Elizabeth would be able to cope with the heavy load. The mistress of the house tried to protect the girl from worries, but the character of her ward was stronger than steel. The beauty felt good and insisted on allowing her to work and accompanying the convoy, which was supposed to leave in 10 days. It was impossible to stop her. Time passed quickly, and the large detachment set off on a long journey. Riding in the carriage along with the representative of enlightenment was a modest young man wearing a large straw hat that hid his face. The road was long, but John had 2 secluded places abroad where everything was prepared for a long stay, where he wanted to go in order to earn money and become free. Elizabeth was surprised to learn that the third gentleman was traveling with her, but her patron insisted on it. John tried not to get out of the cart. It was still very far from the border. Suddenly, the carriage slowed down and new voices were heard. The main character tensed. The familiar smell of energy was circling somewhere nearby. The convoy drove up to the city gates and stopped briefly. The young man heard the voice of his partner greeting the guards of the column and giving instructions to his guards. John did not expect to meet anyone he knew, much less an old friend. This completely ruined his plans. The main character was shocked. He didn't know what to do. Elizabeth could not understand what had happened and why her traveling companion had changed so much. It was not difficult for John to put the still weakened girl, tired from the road, to sleep. Bob was walking past a closed wagon when he heard a quiet voice calling him. He knew exactly who it belonged to and couldn't believe his ears. The gentleman greeted and asked his friend to switch to a secret tone. The head of the guards was no less surprised by the meeting than his partner, who asked not to tell anyone about his presence. The convoy set off. The city roads ended. Then forest thickets, mountain serpentines and passes lay ahead. In a large cave, the former commander of the Steel Blood Demons, Thompson, set up his hiding place, who decided to separate from the fortress and earn money by robbery himself. His squad was small in number, and his deputy offered to take a gang of animal monsters as a share. The merciless killer knew that a holiday was coming soon in the neighboring empire and planned to rob the convoy, purchasing goods for the big celebration. Additional forces were needed, but the sight of a pack of demons in wolf clothing, eating everything in their path, irritated the commander. A column of wagons was due to pass nearby in a few days, and Thompson was considering a plan of attack. Elizabeth slept for 2 days. When she opened her eyes, the third gentleman was sitting as usual. The girl was scared. She did not expect John to do this to her. The beauty indignantly expressed her complaints. The main character calmed her down. The savior referred to a weakened body and the need for rest for complete recovery. The young man offered Elizabeth a snack, treating her to modest supplies. The carriage drove slowly, and it was time for lunch. The red-haired friend, sensing a tasty supply, crawled out from under the seat. The girl was surprised. It was the first time she had seen a fox cub as a pet. The baby looked carefully at the stranger and continued gnawing on the meat. The column stopped for a short rest. The partners met and moved away from people, switching to a safe language that they had mastered in the dangerous forest. John did not understand why an ordinary trade train needed additional protection of elite guards, if there was a security detachment that constantly accompanied all trips. Bob handed the gentleman a secret document that he had received from the commander, along with the order to proceed on the mission. As he studied the important paper, the main character began to shake more and more. It said that one of the worst criminals and the elder of the Heavenly Alliance of Demons and Murderers was planning to seize the peaceful convoy. The mere mention of this monster made John remember and relive the terrible past. The young man could not believe that he would ever again be able to meet his sworn enemy. It was William, the same head of the Alliance of Martial Arts Fortresses and the Lord of the Steel Blood Troops, who killed all the masters, making John a merciless killer, to whom he gave 30 years of service, and from whom he tried to escape on that fateful night. The main character forever remembered their last conversation. The thirst for revenge was stronger than the dream of freedom. The young master warned his partner that the mercenary chief was cunning and merciless. The convoy set off. There was silence in the cart. John could not calm down from the flood of memories. Elizabeth did not understand what happened to her fellow traveler. He was very gloomy. He was simply shaking. The main character tried to calm down, but the last night of his previous life stood before his eyes. The little fox, sitting in the girl's arms, sensed the owner's condition and grabbed onto him. At this time, a guest entered the distant house of the third gentleman. Kate asked the maid why she had not seen her friend anywhere for several days. Emily was also upset by his absence. John told her that he was leaving for training. The main character's sword, standing in its usual place, made the squad leader worry. Not understanding what was happening, the girl became worried. At the next halt, while waiting for the lagging behind, Bob warned the senior convoy about the possibility of an attack. Suddenly, screams were heard in the distance, causing both guard commanders to flinch. The fighters of the main detachment fled with screams of horror, supporting their wounded colleagues. The head of the judge's guards rushed forward, trying to understand what had happened. One of the victims said that the rest of the convoy with goods, loading purchases, was attacked. The main killer was very strong and dexterous. Only a few guards managed to escape, and all the purchased goods were taken away. The main character, who heard the entire conversation, jumped out of the cart in a rage. From the transshipment base, which served as a permanent resting place for the convoy on a long journey, only walls remained. The bodies of the dead lay everywhere. Thompson stood and looked at the trophies. There were surprisingly few of them. They were manuscripts and some herbs. Surprise and a tactical move helped defeat the guards, who were peacefully preparing for the return journey. Because the bulk of the convoy had already left the house, the commander of the Steel Blood did not even resort to the help of new shaggy assistants, spinning around and thirsting for meat. The only surviving guard groaned as he bled. The head of the murderers easily dealt with the dying man, who was not helped by any of the magical powers of his supreme overlord. The beastly brute boys, the commander of his fanged army, reminded Thompson of the need to feed the flock. The commander did not like his insolent tone and the appearance of the toothy assistants who had to be hired for support. The monstrous animals were hungry and thirsty for blood. The bodies of the dead served as easy prey and food for them. The survivors returned to the base, assessed the losses, and buried the defenders. They knew that the mercenaries would not stay there for long and would go into the secret caves they had prepared. Elizabeth, as the head of the convoy, sent the news about what had happened. It was necessary to make a decision what to do next. The representative of education suggested that the guards find the goods and punish the thieves and murderers. The main character asked a friend to give him a weapon. John told Bob where enemies might be hiding and advised him to be very careful. A second later, clouds of dust remained from the gentleman. The magic of rapid transfer carried him to a meeting with his longtime offender. In a rapid flight, the young man was thinking about a plan of revenge. The red animal, like a faithful talisman, was with its owner. While the wolf pack was finishing up the bloody corpses, a guest arrived at Thompson's parking lot. Elder George greeted a familiar fortress commander who had carried out his orders for many years. The head of the steel-blooded assassins told the chief about a squad of new partners in animal skin, which he clearly did not like. The Lord of the Assassin Alliance greeted Boys and his fearsome gang. George reminded the junior in status that you need to be attentive and friendly to those who are on your side, so that the situation does not change in the other direction and friends do not turn out to be enemies. The pack of beasts sent to help the Alliance from the fortress of the Cloudy Thicket was practically invincible. The skin was particularly durable, and the fangs and claws were sharper than any blade. The elder turned to Thompson. The main purpose of the attack was a small thing that was to be taken from the killer's convoy. The commander of the Steel Blood carefully took out a package from his inner pocket. The price of a small bag was dozens of innocent guards doing their job. Having unwrapped the package, the elder looked at the shining blue ball. It was a magical elixir with enormous energy potential, with the help of which the villain dreamed of seizing power from other states. The head of the Heavenly Alliance said goodbye to Thompson, who had been aiming for the position of eldest for several years, and had long ago separated from other representatives of the fortress. The task was completed. The rival, sowing confusion and having a strong team of killers, was no longer needed by the elder. The knife entered through the back straight into the heart of the mercenary. Seeing the lifeless body of the commander, the soldiers were confused. As it turned out, George had known Boys for a long time. They understood each other with one glance, and silent approval was received. The mercenaries were defenseless against the pack of bestial monsters. It was impossible to escape from them. The small village in the middle of the forest was filled with guards from the Fortress of Darkness. The security of the head of the Alliance was waiting for their boss, relaxing in the sun. The elder went away for several days, informing everyone that he was going to visit his mother's grave. This was the official version of his location, not far from the borders of the neighboring empire. It was quiet and calm around. The fighters were training and relaxing. Suddenly, a roar was heard behind the houses. The trees in the forest were shaking, as if in a strong storm, although there was no wind outside. The source of the sounds was John, flying like an arrow into the outskirts of the village. The attack was so unexpected that no one had time to grab a weapon. Not seeing the one he was looking for, the main character tried to find out where the elder had disappeared to. The version of visiting the grave sounded implausible, but the guards were not aware of their master's plans. Frustrated, John took off again in search of the enemy. He must have been somewhere nearby since he left alone. George and the Beast Lord stood on the edge of the cliff. The leaders watched as the pack instantly dealt with Thomas's squad, which had become an unnecessary burden for everyone. Boys praised his shaggy fighters. The elder understood that it was better to have such dangerous warriors on his side. He was already making plans to use them. In his dreams, the head of the Heavenly Alliance had the throne of the Supreme Demon Lord. One of the monsters announced the approach of the enemy. A small detachment of the divine cult appeared in the distance. The defenders of the convoy followed the bloody trail of the criminals. The leader gave the order to the pack to deal with the strangers. The guards of the convoy, together with the judge's guards, moved carefully among the rocks and trees, expecting an attack at any moment. Seeing the enemy, Bob and Elizabeth were confused. Hundreds of sparkling eyes looked at the group of fighters from above from the rocks. The animals quickly rushed to attack. The head of the guards unsuccessfully tried to defend himself, but his strong steel sword could not penetrate the powerful skin of the monsters. Elizabeth used magic balls of ice lightning. The result was very insignificant. The number of animals increased. The number of guards quickly decreased. Bob changed the battle tactics, but the forces were unequal. The girl tirelessly threw chilling sparks at the approaching monsters. The freezing stopped the wolves, but the energy expended required restoration. The friends realized that they needed to retreat in order to save the remnants of the detachment. The enemy was stronger and significantly outnumbered the guards. Bob gave the command to use a spinning technique that could trap the animals and create an impenetrable wall. The unusual method of defense forced the animals to stop, which gave them time to gather strength. The elder watched the battle from above, realizing that fighting was useless and the enemy had no chance. The main character heard the sounds of a distant battle and hurried to the rescue. The beast monsters went on the offensive again. Elizabeth tried in every way to fight off the huge fangs flashing before her eyes. The girl had less and less energy for magic. Gathering all his remaining power, Bob used the blast wave technique, which made it possible to reduce the enemy's onslaught. The surge of the spent force field practically took the head of the judge's guards out of the number of fighters. He could not even stand on his feet. Elizabeth gave the command to the survivors. They urgently needed to retreat to cover. The animals came very close. There was no longer a chance to escape from them. The head of the alliance and the leader of the pack watched from above as the ranks of the defenders melted away. Deciding to show the full power of the Shaggy Kingdom and finally defeat the enemy troops, boys rushed into the crowd of fighters. Bob, who stood in the way of the monster, was blown away by a stream of brutal energy and fell. The girl tried to protect her assistant. Ice storm balls flew towards the enemy one after another. The leader of the predators easily parried the blows. A huge fist fell on the fragile representative of enlightenment. She only managed to group herself a little, which saved her from a broken spine. Boys held poor Elizabeth by the mop of hair. The girl could not move. The animals came closer, anticipating easy prey. One of the detachment of guards of the convoy ordered the thug to release the lady. In an instant, the defender's head disappeared into the monster's toothy mouth. The head of the guards, barely getting up after the attack of the wolf chieftain, gathered his last strength and struck the offender with a magical ray of his sword. The leader of the pack slammed Bob into the stones with a powerful blow. Elizabeth watched in horror as her protector died. The head of the judicial security did not move. Boys signaled to his four-legged fighters. The fanged monsters were preparing for the last battle. The entire pack of animals from the surrounding forests gathered at the call, preparing for the feast. The wolves surrounded the small group of guards on all sides. There was nowhere to retreat. The elder looked at the last minutes of the squad's life without any regret. An unequal battle began again. The strength and number of shaggy monsters outnumbered the enemy thousands of times. Bob tried to get up again. Elizabeth, along with the guards, fought off the animal attacks. Looking back, the girl managed to notice behind her a large shadow of a monster, preparing to attack. There was only one moment left. The flying sword saved the head of the convoy from imminent death. The wolf lay breathless, his blood flowing in a stream. John made it in time, a few more minutes, and only a few bones would be left of the squad. The protagonist's weapon worked tirelessly. Magic rays hit monsters from a distance. The animals could not protect themselves from the power of the energy. Their skin shattered into small pieces. The third gentleman, who came to deal with one monster in human form, encountered a whole flock. It was necessary to save the fighters. The young man challenged the leader to a duel. Boyce's eyes burned with hatred. Taking advantage of the respite, Elizabeth and the remnants of the guards helped the wounded and restored energy. From the height of the cliff, the elder looked in bewilderment at the young man who stopped the monsters and was preparing for battle with the leader of the beast's lair, not understanding how this could happen and who this hero was. John glanced up, and a wave of hatred reached George. The old man suddenly smelled blood. While the unequal battle was going on, the Master of Education received a distinguished guest at her home. The first person of the Empire, General of Strategy Franklin, visited his subordinate. Patricia was surprised by the unexpected visit and slightly frightened, not understanding what she owed to such a famous person who was always extremely busy. The chief strategist did not drag out the conversation and immediately inquired about the third gentleman. The master reminded that Education had never participated in political games in support of contenders for the throne. Franklin made it clear that he knew about the secret departure of the master's student with a convoy abroad. The general was trying to find out what the candidate for a high post was like, about whom there has been a lot of talk lately, and whose name constantly appears in various showdowns. The young lady invited him to meet with the gentleman himself and form his own opinion. Unaware of what high people of the state were talking about him, John prepared for the final battle. One of the bestial monsters was quietly creeping up behind the main character, preparing to attack. Boys gave the command to the pack to prepare for an attack. Suddenly, a small fox with huge golden eyes crawled out of the young man's clothes. The animal jumped to the ground from the hands of the protagonist. The baby sat down behind the owner, as if covering his back from a sneaking wolf. The monster was already very close and was preparing for a deadly throw. The red fox's gaze hypnotized the shaggy giant. Suddenly, the cute little fluffy ball turned into a terrible toothy predator. The wolf trembled with fear. A wave of piercing howls echoed in the mountains. People around could not listen to this strange sound. The beast leader lost his hearing, as if he was paralyzed for some time. There was silence. The little fox calmly looked at his shaggy companion, who could not move. The baby sat on the wolf's back. The attack failed. Boys tried to return to his previous form, but his arms and legs did not obey him. John thanked his four-legged friend for his help, making sure that he did not know anything about his pet. The animals fled. There was nowhere to wait for Boys' support. The battle between two hostile worlds has begun. The advantage was clearly on the side of the protagonist. The leader of the pack could not understand where this unknown young man came from. who could so deftly cope with the flow of energy and masterfully wield a sword. It was necessary to end the fierce battle. John gathered all the magic of the heavenly gates and swung his blade. The head of the bestial leader, eyes wide open, rolled along the stones. The elder who watched the battle regretted the loss of his shaggy allies and decided that it was time to leave the rock and return to his squad. The young man sensed the enemy's plan. It was time to take revenge on his former master. In one jump, the main character overcame the height and found himself next to George. It was necessary to immediately neutralize the enemy. The elder was an experienced fighter and repelled the attack of the unknown young man. The forces on both sides were approximately equal. The head of the alliance used his favorite magical move. John fought off the vortex currents of the moon hammer. All the magical teachings and skills acquired in the bamboo forest, combined with John's refined martial arts techniques, were useful in defeating an old enemy who had deprived the protagonist of his friends and life. The old man could not understand how the stranger knew the ancient secret techniques and why he wanted him dead. The brightly burning feeling of hatred in the gaze of the protagonist spoke of his firm decision to kill. George could not believe that some boy could defeat him, the most powerful and insidious demon of the entire alliance. The young man was resistant to all the attacks of the elder. He called upon all the power of heaven and earth. So great was his predecessor's feeling of hatred and thirst for revenge for the long years of service and the unfulfilled dream of freedom. Powerful streams of energy from the protagonist did not allow the old man to move and weakened his hands. John jumped high and dealt a decisive blow to the enemy. The sword went straight through the enemy's entire body, cutting it into two halves. At the last second, the main character realized that he had thoughtlessly used up too much potential and fell unconscious. The squad's losses were heavy. The remaining fighters collected stolen items and prepared for the return journey. Both main representatives of the government suffered greatly in unequal battles with criminals, but were alive. Bob gave the girl the recovery capsule that the judge's guards received before the mission, although he himself was no less in need of treatment. Elizabeth thanked the brave warrior for everything. The quietly yapping red-haired baby attracted the attention of those talking. The little fox seemed to be calling somewhere, and Bob hurried after him. Finally, the animal stopped, and the head of the judicial guard saw an unexpected picture. The gentleman lay unconscious on the ground. Next to him was the body of the elder of the heavenly alliance of demons and murderers, cut into two parts. The nightmare trip was over, but not everyone returned home. Patricia tried to console her ward, convincing her that her actions were correct. Bob reported on the unfulfilled task of protecting the convoy to the commander of the judge's guard detachments. The manager understood that the head of security was not to blame, but he had to punish him for the loss of his colleagues. The young man was temporarily excluded from the ranks of the guard and sent as the bodyguard of the third master for an indefinite period. There was silence in the main character's house. John opened his eyes and was taken aback by surprise. He was again lying on the bed. As a few months ago, a happy little fox was jumping nearby. The dream of freedom collapsed again. When the partner found his friend lying exhausted, he ordered him to be carried to the cart and delivered home. It took several days to recover. The upset young man went out into the yard. Bob walked towards the main character, who spoke about his punishment and the order of the commander. The young master was shocked. It was necessary to place a new resident in the house nearby. The escape was postponed again. Emily prepared breakfast and the friends sat down at the table. Bob was cheerful and thanked the maid for the delicious dishes. John did not touch the food. He was silent and thoughtful. The young man understood that he had pushed back his dream with a thirst for revenge and tried to analyze the situation with the loss of energy, which could change the outcome of the battle. Smiling, Kate went to visit friends, taking more food with her. There was a knock at the gate, and the young people became wary. They were not expecting anyone else. An unknown man was walking across the yard. John asked the guest to introduce himself and was surprised to learn that in front of him was a very famous person. Before the arrival of a high-ranking person, the main character asked Bob where he brought the sword, given after his exile in the forest from. His partner spoke about a weapons storage facility, which can only be accessed once and not for everyone. The information about the warehouse was heard by the general, who turned out to be that stranger. He promised the owner of the house to take advantage of his status and take him there. At the request of the strategist, the main character and he were left alone. Franklin said that he knew about the third gentleman leaving the Empire. John did not hide this fact. The purpose of the visit was not clear to him. On the way to the weapons room, the main character felt an aura of lies emanating from the general and took out a sword. John was confident in himself and was ready to kill the high official if he did not tell the truth. The uninvited guest caught the steadfastness in the young man's words and gaze and realized that he was not joking. Death was very close. The general admitted that he personally wanted to meet the main candidate for the throne, who is supported by the ruler, in order to develop further tactics of behavior and solutions to state problems. The main character realized that the offer to visit the armory was just an excuse to get him out of the house without the support of his friends, and he went back upset. Franklin himself was surprised by his kindness, and the trip to the Heavenly Ray warehouse continued. The huge room was filled with all kinds of weapons. It was a special place that not all members of society were allowed to visit. Even the heirs could come here no more than once. The strategist waited outside and was taken aback when he saw John come out of the gate with several swords, explaining that there was no conversation about the number of units, and since this might be the only trip to the secret room, he made provisions for the future. The young man was right. I had to agree with his arguments and allow him to take all the selected items. Bob met the gentleman in the courtyard. He was frightened by the visit of the distinguished guest. Seeing the choice of the owner, the bodyguard was shocked. Each sword had its own ancient history and meaning. These were some of the best blades in the warehouse. The young man did not forget about his partner and brought a heavy sword with a wide blade as a gift. His friend's happiness knew no bounds. It was a weapon with hidden devilish energy that could only be activated by the real owner. A knock on the gate again frightened the partners, notifying the owner of the house about the ruler's order to arrive at the main temple. The high priest was surprisingly kind and talkative. The teacher was pleased with the successes and victories of his best student, and as a gift presented him with a lesson and manuscripts on improving the magical teachings that John studied in the bamboo grove. It was a priceless treasure. The first guardian of the empire unexpectedly asked the general to accept him for the first time. They talked about the third student. The strategist confirmed the opinion of the master of education that this is an extraordinary person who is worthy of respect and attention. After communicating with the master, the main character was visited by the head of the Palace of Justice. His request was that it was necessary to help find and detain the killer. Everything was complicated by the fact that he was a representative of a very high rank who could not be disposed of by the judicial authorities. John was not happy to talk with Tad, remembering past disagreements, but promised to help and went to Patricia for information. The main festival of the year was coming up, which needed to be used for support from numerous residents and guests of the holiday. The Master of Education collected information about all the invited guests and passed it on to the main character. The streets of the capital were beautifully decorated with bright lanterns. Crowds of guests walked along the streets. John and his friends also came to the celebration. Having waited for a detachment of the clan of Sharp Blades to arrive at the central square, the third gentleman came out to meet and greeted the head of a large family. Alan was dissatisfied with the stop and was loudly indignant. John asked in the presence of the crowd to answer one question. Having learned that this was the ruler's disciple, the father of the family greeted the young man, reluctantly answering his tricky question about duty to the empire and protecting law and order regardless of the circumstances, even if his child was the criminal. Alan's two sons walked behind their ancestor, casting hateful glances in John's direction. The eldest smelled of dozens of deaths. The youngest was shrouded in powerful demonic energy. The ruler was to choose one of them as his next student at the festival. In the evening, Bob and his girlfriend were returning from a tavern when an unknown person stopped them. The demon was determined and demanded the magic sword of the protagonist's bodyguard. The stranger deftly used his hands. He did not need any additional effort to knock out his friends, who were not at all expecting an attack. John's appearance saved the squad leader and the guard from senseless bloodshed. The guy's demonic power was enormous. Only with the help of magical knowledge was it possible to cope with it and detain the criminal, who confessed to the murders of many innocent people in the district. This was the youngest son of the head of the Order of Sharp Blades, but the performer of the demonic execution rites was the elder brother, who had yet to be detained. The owner of the Hall of Justice thanked the main character for his help. Despite the late hour, the third gentleman went to the father of the family and provided a list of victims of his children. The conversation was difficult. The man could not believe what was said, accusing the young man of fighting with competitors. The main day of the festival had arrived, on which everyone with a request or problem could count on the support of the ruler. The tent with the Supreme Lord was carried along the central streets of the capital. Sullivan greeted his subjects. Residents and guests of the holiday greeted their patron. Alan, who had not slept all night, listened to the order of the ruler to include his eldest son in the team of his students and made a speech. The leader of the divine cult of demons invited the head of the clan to the temple and called the third student to him. After listening to the story and repentance of the father, he promised to punish the young man, who now did not belong to the family. Alan left the sanctuary, and the all-knowing Sullivan tried to understand the student why he suggested to the grief-stricken father, who defends his children to the last, a worthy way out to preserve the honor of the order. The supreme demon lord looked at his student, whose thoughts and actions he could not fully predict, wondering what was hidden in the young man's head, what the little fox had to do with all the events, and what changes were coming in the near future. The main character did not take his eyes off the teacher, not imagining how he would deal with Alan's sons, what awaited him ahead, whether he would be able to achieve his cherished dream and become free, or whether he was destined for the throne of power.